Good morning. Before I go into my homily, I just have to share with you a little family piece of interest. My dad's brother was married to Lucy, Aunt Lucy, and Aunt Lucy had a sister who was married 4 times. And her instructions when she died was to be cremated, and a quarter of her ashes was to be buried with each of her husbands. So she took care of the problem that Jesus could not take care of. My child, I know it is difficult to love. I know it is difficult to forgive. I know it is difficult to suffer. But look, I am taking away your heart, and in its place, I am putting my heart. Now I will be suffering. Now I will be forgiving. Now I will be loving. In you, my heart is beating in you. The problem with the Sadducees today is that they can't imagine anything bigger or better than the small world in which they live, that small world they know. And that is a struggle not only for the Sadducees, but it's also a struggle for us. It's a struggle for the church in its history of how do we see beyond the world that we know. St. Paul, in his writings, expanded the world for the early church by using images like fighting the fight, running the race, that were not out of the Jewish tradition, but spoke to the Gentiles to whom he was preaching and to whom he was writing. St. Augustine, who might be called really the founder of Western Christianity, lived in the 4th century. He expanded thought based on a lot of his Neoplatonic philosophy. He brought Christianity into new terms and new ways of speaking, if you read his confessions, based on the philosophy of Plato, who lived about 500 years before Christ. A few years later, St. Thomas Aquinas developed scholastic theology and scholastic philosophy, but his base was Aristotle. Now, Thomas Aquinas lived in the 1200s. Aristotle lived, in the 380s BC. But again, it was an effort to translate into a speakable language or a contemporary language the mysteries that we experience in faith. And I will both brag and confess to you that my sophomore year of college and the seminary, I got the highest grades in the class in our introductory scholastic philosophy class. It was taught in Latin, which I flunked, the Latin part, but I could memorize. So did I learn anything? I have no idea, but I could write the answers because I had memorized everything. The challenge is, for us, how do we translate our faith into a contemporary world? I was at a meeting the other day with the bishop, and actually Father Leo was at the meeting also, and the bishop was sharing with us his concern because a Pew report indicated that a high percentage of Catholics don't necessarily believe in the real presence of the Lord in the bread and in the wine, in the Eucharist. And as I was reading what he was handing out, the word that kept jumping out to me was transubstantiation. Now, again, I had taken philosophy, I got grades in it, but don't ask me what transubstantiation means. I do know that I believe that we change the body and blood of the Lord into a sacrament in the cup and in the bread. But I have no idea how to explain what transubstantiation is. And it is a scholastic term that I dare say most people in the pews would not be able to define. It comes from a previous generation, it comes from a previous time, in an effort to try to categorize and to explain what is a mystery to us all. But what it said to me was that we are still holding on to this kind of a term in explaining our faith. And if we ask ourselves the question of why do young people turn away from the faith, or why are our pews not filled with people who are as excited as we are about the faith, I would purport that possibly is because we don't have a language that speaks to the present age. You know, when Copernicus announced to the world that, guess what? The earth is not the center of creation. The sun does not go around the earth. The earth goes around the sun. It changed everything. All of a sudden, we were not who we thought we were. It took away our dignity as the center of all things and the special place in God's creation. It changed theology, it changed art, it changed poetry, it changed music, it changed the way in which people think of themselves. And later, of course, when Galileo announced to the world that, guess what? You know, it's bigger than this framework that we see, even in our solar system, he was considered to be a heretic. In fact, Galileo, studied in Padua at the secular university because you could not ask these kinds of questions at the official university in Rome. The world blew apart. And if we are to believe what the Hubble telescope tells us, particularly this newest one that is out there looking beyond and beyond, that there are more galaxies out there than there are grains of sand on all the beaches of this world. How do we talk about creation? How do we talk about heaven? How do we talk about death? Now, another little personal story. My mother, we were mentioning her, was a very wise woman. And one day, she asked her son, who's a very holy Catholic priest, if there is life on other planets, on other Earths out there someplace, do they have their own Jesus, or does our Jesus save them? Now, that's a good question, because I had no answer, and I don't think any theologian in the church has ever asked the question or answered that question, Well, we look at our young people, we look at our present age, and the environment in which they are experiencing life is so contrary, not just to the Sadducees in their day, where the earth was flat, and you had a sky, and the sun moving across it. They're talking about a whole different type of reality, of understanding of who we are in this massive universe. And our challenge, and a challenge that I think that we are not really doing really well with, is trying to explain faith in light of these new realities, these new ways of experiencing the world and new knowledge in science. I mean, Copernicus was a scientist. He turned the world upside down. Same thing with Galileo. He was a heretic, and only just a few years ago was he, quote, what's the word? He was purified. What's the word? Absolved. He was absolved or whatever. Anyway, now he's okay. He's gone from hell to heaven real fast. How do we explain it? And it's a challenge that we as a church traditionally are very slow to do, but our world is moving faster than we can keep up with at all. So what does this say about heaven? Well, I got in trouble when I was in high school in I'm getting so old I can't remember the classes I was in, but anyway, a math class, where you do the triangles and that stuff. Geometry. It was my geometry class. And the proposition is that to have location, you need three bodies. You need three things, three places, so that you can say that this body is either half or twice or a third of the distance as it is to the third body. So you use the two bodies as a reference, and then you can make this an estimate of the location of the third body. So I raised my hand and I said, well, Mary's in heaven, Jesus is in heaven, and we're here. So we should be able, that's three bodies, we should be able to locate heaven, right? And the response of the teacher was, go see the dean. Yeah, okay. Well, we can't just say go see the dean with unanswered questions these days because, this does not work. So what do we say about heaven? What do we say? Let me just try something different. Because sometimes when we think of a place, we think of a place in terms of a geographic place. And in this day and age, we cannot geographically place heaven. So where is my mother, my father? Where are those whom we love who have gone before us? Where are they? What happens when life ceases? See, the other thing about the immensity of the world, I read a book, I've read lots of books, but I read a book one time where there was a story about a father who had been separated, as a slave, who had been separated from his child and the mother of his child, and he went through hell and high water trying to find them and reconnect with them. And somebody asked him along that path, what gives you the energy to go through everything that you've gone through and are going through in search of your child? And he said, his response was, my wife and I have consorted with God in creating an immortal being. It is the most precious thing on this earth. Now, that sounds theologically correct. It just blew my mind when I read it in words. And ever since then, when I have had a baptism, I have emphasized to the parents that this child of theirs has changed the universe, has changed all of creation. For never before, in the billions of years in which this cosmos has existed, has this life force been present. And never again will this same life force be present. It is unique, and it is eternal, and it makes an eternal imprint upon the life that is our God, is creation. Love, and the love that we experience in life, indeed, is a life force. When life as we know it in the body ceases, the love that has been imprinted upon creation continues and can never be erased. It is everlasting. It becomes the home, the embracing arms that enfold us. Love is the substance. Life is the outgrowth of that substance. I don't have the answer to where heaven is. I cannot tell you what heaven looks like or what's happening between my parents at this time. I do know that their life force is still present, is around me, is around us, has been gifted to our world, and can never be denied or erased. And so I'm just going to read 3 lines to sum up what I think happens. So the place that the dead person goes to, leaving their bodies behind, is into the heart of love, into the arms of the God who is love and who has gifted us with their presence and their love for the time and the days they have been physically within our midst. And that love lasts forever and indelibly changes not only us, but the universe. Let me just say that again. So the place where dead people go, leaving their bodies behind, is into the heart of love, into the arms of God who is love and who has gifted us with their love in their presence that lasts forever. I think it is a struggle, and it's going to be an ongoing struggle for the church, for ourselves, to reimagine and to reframe, to find words that speak to ourselves and to our hearts and to our current generation about the mysteries that we hold dear. The mystery of the Lord's presence within our midst that we celebrate at this Eucharist. The mystery of the Lord's presence that nourishes us and enables us to live more fully in God's love. I pray for the church as we struggle to reimagine, and hopefully we're not too late for our own children. Because I really know, we all know, that people struggle with the realities of life, with the realities of forgiveness, the realities of suffering, the realities of love. And as the poem started, it said at the beginning, I am taking away your heart, and in this place I am putting my heart. Now I will be your suffering, I will be forgiving, now I will be loving. In you my heart is beating, in you, and that is my gift of eternal life. Amen.